Nask here. So the elections are over, and while the final votes are still being tabulated, the results are the same nonetheless. Donald Trump is the president-elect. Now, I know a lot of Hillary supporters, especially those of the progressive left, are particularly upset about these results, as evidenced by the protests and riots. Yes, riots, going on in several cities around the country right now. Not to mention all of the calls now from the left to abolish the Electoral College. But we'll cover these things later. First and foremost, I want to make my argument. I'd like to clarify why I believe the left brought these results upon themselves and lost this election via their own methods. The Democratic Party for the last couple of years or so has been struggling to really engage with the voters. As the primaries got started, it looked like it was going to be your usual Hillary Clinton versus whoever the Republicans could muster up. Then along came two candidates, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Both candidates gave a powerful shot of adrenaline to each of the two parties. As the primaries continued on, however, it became more and more clear how each side was handling the newcomers. On the right, Donald Trump dominated the primaries after an initial bout of struggling against such a large and divided field of candidates. Bernie Sanders had a different struggle, however. He had to deal with the power and influence of the DNC and the mainstream media dismissing him, silencing him, and colluding against him. As the Democratic primaries started coming to a close, there were already many people believing that it had been rigged against Sanders either from the start or as soon as the establishment saw him gaining ground extremely quickly. Hillary's campaign, public supporters, media supporters, and the DNC as well, spent so much of the primaries lobbying divisive and instigating accusations and remarks at both Bernie Sanders and his supporters. The Bernie Bros issue, accusations of sexism and racism, on and on they went. Clinton's entire campaign machine felt that they could get her to the White House running the usual gauntlet of social justice buzzwords, accusations, and arguments. Upon becoming the nominee, Clinton was well on her way and could now put the entire focus of attack on Donald Trump. However, these tactics caused a large and noticeable rift in the Democratic Party and voter base. Not long after, WikiLeaks released the DNC emails, and the voters saw the blatant corruption in the system. They saw the obvious collusion between the Clinton campaign, the DNC, as well as the media. This only caused further rifts in the Democratic Party and damaged Clinton's reputation and numbers further. Then there was the release of the Podesta emails, the scandal around her emails when she was Secretary of State, the tensions and feelings of mistrust in the system as the FBI Director James Comey refused to indict her even based on the evidence, apparent collusion between the Clintons and Loretta Lynch, and the biased pressure from Obama on Hillary's behalf. Scandal after scandal continued to crop up. All the while, the Clinton campaign, media, and the social justice left continued attacking Donald Trump on accusations of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, etc. The fear-mongering went on and on and on. Finally, there came more WikiLeaks releases, the reopening of the case against Hillary due to the discovery of over 650,000 emails on a shared computer used by Huma Abedin and her husband Anthony Weiner, as well as the Project Veritas videos. More and more scandals, more and more evidence of corruption and foul play. Hillary and her supporters kept on with the buzzwords and fear-mongering, however, hoping, I presume, to distract the public from these issues by attempting to keep attention on their negative attacks against Trump. In the end, though, it wasn't enough. Clinton could have won in the right circumstances. However, she overplayed her hand and got in bed with a very divisive aspect of her voter base. This is why Hillary lost. This is why the Democrats failed to get the majority in the Senate and House of Representatives. This is why Democrats lost control of so many governorships and state legislatures. This is why the Democrats lost so handily. They lost by partaking in collusion to rig their primaries in her favor and defeat Bernie Sanders, who by every measure would have been the stronger candidate against anyone the Republicans could have fielded had it been Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, or otherwise. They lost by being so dismissive of the obvious corruption in their own party and being so forgiving of establishment politics as usual in an election cycle where for most voters, the establishment could no longer be tolerated and so many wanted genuine change. They lost by adopting the curse of identity politics and intersectionalism, which in any and every manner serves only to divide people and give them justification to attack others senselessly on the basis of gender, race, sexuality, and so on, while attempting to virtue signal and paint themselves as morally superior, despite partaking in the very kind of bigotry they are so ready to baselessly accuse others of. They lost by spending the last 2 years constantly attacking whites and men, as well as even attacking women and people of color just as harshly for daring to have their own thoughts and express their individuality, rather than blindly subscribe to their identitarian collectivism without question. They lost by taking their political correctness to new and frightening levels, whereby they attempt to change the laws and culture of our society to suit their agendas and demand punishment for those who don't fall in line, by attempting to police our words and thoughts, by hampering or outright demolishing the very fabric of higher education institutions through censorship and mob justice. They lost by attacking their opponents incessantly and pushing a negative and damning message upon the whole of society as being sick, being sexist, being racist, etc., insulting and berating not only the supporters of their opponents as bigots and deplorable, but doing the same to those in their own party and political spectrum as well. They lost by damning everyone who wasn't already in their circles, as if to guilt-trip the electorate into somehow seeing the errors of their ways and eventually joining them to beg for forgiveness. They lost by being nothing but negative through the entire campaign, painting the country and people in it as broken and pathetic, while their opponents pushed positive messages of inclusion, greatness, and hope. They lost by falling victim to their own egos. They lost to hubris. Of course, one could understandably believe that after such an election, after such resounding defeat, that these people would take a step back in order to re-examine their messages and methods, to determine where they went wrong and readjust themselves in order to more effectively convince the voters in the future. You would, unfortunately, be very wrong. The social justice left immediately doubled down, lashing out even harder with their accusations and hyperbole, attempting to spin their own defeat and failures as proof that they were right all along. All through social media, as well as the online alternative media and mainstream media alike, they began to scream ever louder and promote apocalyptic rhetoric. They kept on and on about how Trump will be a horrible, fascist dictator, how he will be such a danger to people of color, Muslims, and the LGBT community. The fervor got spinning from the moment the election was declared and Hillary had conceded. Already there are false reports being made of Trump supporters attacking minority groups. There are even reports of LGBT people committing suicide. If the latter is true, then the left has no one to blame except for themselves for pushing their narratives and rhetoric so hard as to convince these people that their very lives are at stake and destroying them emotionally. One would assume that after their defeat, the left would have learned a lesson from their mistakes. They didn't. They learned absolutely nothing. Instead, they hunkered down and pushed their narratives and rhetoric even harder. They chose to forgive and abide by corruption. They chose to prop up the weaker candidate. They chose to spit on the very voters they needed in order to be successful. They brought this upon themselves, and they have no one else to blame. But they will. As they always do, they will blame everyone and everything except for themselves and continue to wallow in their falsely self-righteous victimhood mentality. Well, now that that is out of the way, I believe I can finally address a couple of issues regarding the protests and riots that have broken out as a result of Trump's victory. Thousands of people, mainly young people, have taken to the streets in protests in multiple cities around the country as a result of Donald Trump's election victory. Many chant phrases such as, "Fuck Trump" or "Not my president." Plenty carry signs with the same or similar sentiments. In and of itself, I can understand and respect the rights of these people to assemble and protest due to their displeasure with the results of the election. What I cannot respect, however, is the calls from these people now to abolish the Electoral College due to the fact that it seems that Hillary will come out just barely on top in the popular vote, as well as some of these protests turning violent and destructive. Many of these people don't seem to grasp why the Electoral College exists. In essence, it exists as a method of ensuring that the electorate is more evenly and effectively given representation in national elections, rather than allowing a few very heavily populated counties across the nation to have voting power which would, especially in this day and age, outstrip the voices of the vast majority of the country. The Electoral College may not be perfect, but it is still a more fair and effective method of balance in national elections in order to best ensure voter representation than a strict popular vote. One must also bear in mind that this nation is and was founded as a constitutional republic, not a strict democracy. Power is meant to be most concentrated in the hands of the states and lower-level representations, like counties, cities, and other municipalities. In a strict democracy, anything and everything could become an issue requiring national voting. This very concept is, in and of itself, ineffective, inefficient, and overwhelmingly wasteful in terms of time and resources, especially in a country as large and populous as this. As for the protests themselves, some have already begun to turn violent and destructive. Portland, Oregon is a prime example. Property is already being destroyed and some Trump supporters are already being targeted for attack. I cannot hold any respect for protests or protesters such as these. You have the right to peacefully assemble to voice your grievances and displeasures. Destruction of property, attacking political opponents, and impeding the daily lives of those who haven't wronged or harmed you in any way are not acts of protest. They are acts of malice. If you wish to protest peacefully and have a message heard, feel free to do so. But you will not do yourselves or your message any good by turning your grievances into nothing more than out-of-control temper tantrums because you didn't get your way. That's honestly all I really have to say on the issue of this election, to be honest. If I could leave the protesters and Hillary supporters with one last message, however, it would be this. You lost. Get your shit together and deal with it like the adults you supposedly are. This has been the word from the wolf. Woof woof, motherfuckers.